I have decided to change my story. I had a story plan, and for some reason, you know how you sometimes get moved. Sometimes a story comes up and says, oi, you're not telling that one, you're telling this one. And this story is extraordinarily inconvenient that it's done that, because it's not a story I've ever told before. But it is a story we all know. It's not a story, it's not. But what makes this unusual is this. And from this little statuette, you can work out the story. It's a Pied Piper of Hamelin with his little mice, his little rats down here. And this Pied Piper was commissioned by my grandfather to be made by a woodcutter in Hamelin, because that's where he was stationed after the Second World War. There's a lot of stories I could tell about my grandparents and my mother being stationed in Hamelin at the end of the Second World War, which are actually quite entertaining, but that is not a story for tonight. But this one is. And concerning these little chaps. And they were all over Hamelin. Everywhere. Everywhere you went, there was a mouse, there was a rat, there was a rodent of some description. You couldn't eat, you couldn't sleep, you couldn't do a thing without having a rat watching you or taking a rather overly intimate interest in your doings. And eventually, when all the grain had been eaten, there wasn't a single person who could get kind of friendly with a loved one without a rat looking about what was going on, and it was really putting everybody off. They said, we've got to do something about it. We can't continue like this. With all the grains going, I mean, there's 4 rats in my bed, and frankly, I want to be in my bed and I don't want the rats there. And so they convened a town meeting. They said, look, you're the mayor, let's do something about this. Get rid of the rats. And the mayor said, well, we've tried everything. We've tried. And suddenly from the back of the hall was, well, you haven't tried me. And who should be standing there but a man with a pipe? And you can see the pipe here. Now, the pipe that's always displayed, I think this is a shawm. I'm sure of this. This is a shawm. This is a reeded instrument. And as everyone knows who's seen a shawm, I play shawms, and they are the best. They are absolutely the best, but they're not for everybody. And the rat catcher, Piper, pulled out his pipe and said, I can get rid of your rats, but I'm not going to do it for nothing. I mean, look at me. He was a Pied Piper, and pied sounds something we don't really understand now, but what it meant was someone who couldn't afford plain cloth. Someone whose clothes were made from all the bits of cloths they could get hold of, stitched together, probably on the inside to keep them warm. If you're pied, you're poor. And he looked at this town. Hamelin was rich. If you want to have the rats not looking at you when you're having a nice time, if you want to keep your grain, give me some money and I'll get rid of your rats. And the people of the town looked at the Piper, and the Piper looked at the people of the town, and the Piper knew that he was the one who could leave and go somewhere else, and the people of the town knew that they couldn't. So they agreed that this stranger, this person who had never seen before, was their best hope, because nothing else had worked. And so they said, yeah, we'll give you 100 guilders. It's a lot then. The Piper certainly had never been paid anything like that before. They said, yeah. So he got out his pipe, got out his shawm, and started playing. And there are people who will dish shawm playing. But if you can play, it's an amazing sound. And it's the instrument of dancing, because when it plays, your feet want to dance. And the rat's feet wanted to dance to the Piper. So the Piper was playing his pipe, wending his way out of the town of Hamelin with all the rats dancing along behind him. And all the people of the town were watching the rats. And their feet were moving a bit, but they were able to stop them from going anywhere. and they watched the piper walk into the river. Because if you've ever been to Hamelin, and I haven't, but I've spent a lot of time talking with my mum, there is a river at the bottom. And he walked into the river, and the rats followed him, and the rats danced into the water, and they couldn't stop dancing, for the pipe was playing, and they went in and they danced until they drowned, which wasn't that good for the rat, but the people of Hamelin were really pleased about it. And so the next day at the meeting, the piper came back and said, I've got rid of your rats. And they said, oh yeah. How much did we say we're going to pay you? 100 guilder, said the piper. That's a lot, said the people of Hamelin, because suddenly, when there were no rats, 100 guilder seemed a lot. And they said, well, have you got it in writing? Did you get a contract? You said you were going to pay me. I know we said, but is it in writing? I mean, it's a lot of money, and you look like someone who's a bit distractible. In fact, with your pied clothes and your shawm plaids, and everyone knows that shawm plaids are up to no good, I'm wondering if you didn't send the rats. If you didn't send the rats just so you could take them into the river. Because you don't look like the kind of person we like to have around here. You're a stranger. Who knows you? Who are you? We don't like strangers here. You could be a murderer. In fact, you probably are. They don't be murdered. I think you ought to leave. And the piper, this probably wasn't the first time. He was a piper, wandering minstrel. He couldn't even afford a good coat. He had to make it out of scraps. Accepted that's what was going to happen. So he took out his shawm again and said, well, if that's what you want to do, I won't get my 100 guilders, but I will get a price. And he put his shawm and his reed in his lips, and he started playing. And the last time the people had found that they'd been able to resist the dancing steps of the shawm. But this time the adults still could, but the children couldn't. The children found that shawm was the best sound they'd ever heard. And they were saying, no, let me go, I've got to go. And the parents were trying to drag their children away, but they couldn't, because children are slippery when they really want to. And they were running after their children. And the children were running around and dancing around them, and the parents just couldn't catch them. And the piper went up the hill, because if you've been to Hamelin, I haven't been to Hamelin, but my mother's told me about it. There's a hill. And in the hill, there's a cave. And the piper went up the hill, dancing up the hill with the parents trying to grab at their children, not being able to, until he went in the cave. And the parents tried to get him, but they couldn't. They were running after their children, and their children were running around. And the piper went in, and the sound of the shawm was coming out of the cave of the hill of Hamelin, amplifying the sounds of that shawm. That dancing shawm. Suddenly the adults couldn't resist it anymore. They had to dance too. But they danced away when the children danced too. And the children followed the piper into the cave on the hill in Hamelin, and were never, ever seen again. And that's my story about this.